What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are checking out the new Poco X5 Pro. Now this, of course, is the successor to last year's Poco X4 Pro, and some of you may also recognize it as a rebranded Redmi Note 12 Pro Speed, which was available mainly in China. But this guy, the X5 Pro, is going to be available now in other parts of Asia and in Europe as well. It'll retail for about $500, and considering the specs and features on this thing, that's a pretty competitive price in today's smartphone world. Poco is still very much sticking to their value proposition, offering a solid device at a much lower price. So I'm going to go over everything you need to know about this new Poco X5 Pro here, but first things first, let's just quickly unbox it so I can show you what all comes inside the package when you buy one. Now, fortunately, the box and packaging for these Poco devices have remained relatively unchanged, which means we still get all the necessary accessories and extras. Sliding off the lid, the first thing you'll find is a big old packet of stuff. The SIM ejector tool is attached there on the outside, and inside there's a whole stack of paperwork and instructional manuals if you need them, along with a very familiar crystal clear rubbery case to protect your new phone. I'll pop that on in just a second, but it's always nice to have included. Next up is the phone itself in all of its very bright yellow glory, and at the bottom of the box underneath that cardboard divider are the last two essentials. You get a 67-watt wall plug for charging, along with a USB-C cable, and like I've said a million times before, it's always nice to not just still have these included, but to see Poco's interest in emphasizing fast charging speeds. That's not something you can say about some other smartphone brands nowadays. So with all that stuff out of the way, here is the new Poco X5 Pro once again. Now, Poco's flagship color has always been this bright yellow, but the X5 Pro also comes in black and blue if you'd rather get something more subtle. Though to be honest, I'm actually a pretty big fan of this black and yellow color scheme. At first glance, the X5 Pro does look relatively similar to the X4 Pro from last year, but this phone sees a bit of a redesign, and most of its big changes actually come on the inside. Physically, the X5 Pro is once again a 6.67-inch device. That's the exact screen size corner to corner, and you'll notice a center hole punch selfie camera up top and relatively minimal bezels all around with very little bottom chin, which yields you about an 87% screen to body ratio. In the hand, the X5 Pro is quite comfortable, a little bigger than the average 6.5 or 6.6-inch devices we often see, but with no bulky borders in the way, what you have here is pretty much all screen. So stretching your fingers to the corners and edges is perfectly comfortable. The phone itself is also fairly flat now all around, no curved display, no rounded rear housing or tapered edges, very much shaped like a brick, but it feels nice and has enough weight to it, I think, even though it is basically all plastic. Keep in mind too that this phone is only IP53 dust and splash resistant, so while you may be able to spill something on it accidentally, dunking it into the pool is probably a no-go. And as far as the included case, here's what that looks like on the phone. It definitely gives you all the protection you could want and a bit of a grip while still being able to show off your device. Super simple rubber clear case, obviously, for sure, but like I said, it's always nice to have tossed in. And speaking of protection, the X5 Pro does ship with a screen protector pre-installed as well. It's nothing fancy, just a thin film that definitely attracts a lot of fingerprints, but again, I suppose it's better than nothing and should at least keep the display scratch-free for a while. Around back, the bright yellow rear cover actually has a bit of a sparkly finish that extends even to the darker areas around the camera, and the silver Poco logo is also sort of glittery. It's subtle, but I think adds a little bit more to make this phone feel premium. Like I said, the yellow and black accents are certainly very bold, and altogether, the phone is unique, to say the least, and very much aligns with what we've seen from Poco before. Taking a look around, there's nothing on the left side of the phone. On the right side, you've got the volume buttons, along with the power button, which does double as your fingerprint sensor. I found this to be easy to set up, quick to use and to unlock, and certainly the right choice for a phone like this. I always prefer the physical button fingerprint sensor over a potentially less accurate in-display fingerprint sensor like we've seen on some other mid-range phones. There's also face unlock, which works well, so either way you go, you should be able to get into this device pretty fast. Up top, you'll see a few interesting things actually. The headphone jack is still here, along with an IR blaster and the secondary speaker, which is a full-size speaker, not one crammed into the earpiece like most phones. At the bottom is where you'll see the other speaker, alongside the USB-C port for charging and the SIM card tray. This phone does support dual SIMs, though unfortunately Poco did drop SD card support for this phone. Now that's honestly not a huge deal because you can now get either 128 or 256 gigs of built-in storage on the X5 Pro. The OS and the pre-installed apps take up about 32 gigs right off the bat. But there's actually a bunch of pre-installed apps, games, and other bloatware that you can uninstall to free up another 5 or so gigs of space, which I definitely recommend you do. And fortunately, everything that I wanted off of this phone, I was able to remove. The display on the X5 Pro is a 2400 by 1080 resolution AMOLED screen with HDR10 Plus support and now Dolby Vision support. It's similar to last year's display, though spec-wise, technically not as bright, but what you lose in brightness, you most certainly gain in color. This is a super punchy and very vibrant looking display, and there are a couple color profiles you can switch between in settings to get the right look based on your preferences. But this is no doubt a great looking screen all around. It is also a 120Hz high refresh rate display. You can either set it to adjust the refresh rate automatically between 60 and 120Hz based on what's on screen, or lock it to the full 120Hz, which is what I did, and that obviously is going to give you a super smooth and very responsive feel with all your taps and touches. With this combination of size and resolution, I also think the X5 Pro is plenty sharp. It's a big display for sure, but you won't be picking out any pixels no matter how closely you might look. And collectively, you guys know that a display like this ticks the 3 main boxes I look for in a mid-range device: OLED, 120Hz, and 1080 resolution. So I couldn't ask for much more. And overall, I do think the X5 Pro definitely delivers a nice viewing experience. The out loud listening experience on this phone is also really solid. Like I mentioned earlier, the X5 Pro has 2 full-size speakers at the top and bottom, unlike some other phones where the secondary speaker is buried within the earpiece. That means you get a louder, fuller stereo sound with both speakers doing similar work. And this is something that I personally value quite a lot. Here's a sound sample with a demo of each speaker individually so you can get an idea for yourself. So probably the single biggest area of improvement for the X5 Pro this year versus last year is with performance. Powering this phone now is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G chipset paired to the Adreno 642L GPU and either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM for the 128 or 256 gig storage options respectively. Across the board, those specs are all a step up over last year's X4 Pro. And if you're really into the numbers, here are the Geekbench scores for the device so you can do some comparisons. In addition to the hardware spec bumps, this phone also ships with a newer version of Android and MIUI, Android 12 for now and MIUI 14. Now, while we're currently missing out on the latest version of Android, MIUI on this phone I found runs quite well as sort of a quasi-stock Android feel with some refreshed visuals and tasteful customizations like the control center and notification pane, along with the various Mi-specific apps and tools to help better manage this device. Though Poco isn't really shy about this phone's Google support. They say so right on the box, actually. So if you aren't all about that Me life yet and just want to utilize all things Google, you can certainly do that. Overall, I actually find the performance upgrades on this phone to be pretty solid. You aren't going to be competing against a $1,000 flagship, but what you do get is a fast and powerful phone that I think could stand strong for a few years, so long as there's some software updates and support to go along with it. For $500, this is where most of the value is to be had, and I'm interested to see how this phone fares in the coming weeks as I continue to put it to the test for my full review. Also crammed inside this phone is a pretty good sized 5,000 milliamp battery. Now the capacity itself isn't too over the top, but the charging support on this phone, just like last year, is one of the bigger selling points. With 67-watt wired support and USB-C power delivery, you can charge this phone up from 0 to 50% in about 15 minutes, and a full charge to 100% takes just under 50 minutes. You still don't get any wireless charging on this phone, but honestly, I'll take a super fast charge via a big power brick over almost anything else. Finally, when it comes to cameras, this is another area where Poco tends to like to go above and beyond, and I think that's pretty obvious just by looking at the back of this phone. Though for this new X5 Pro, we seem to have a relatively similar camera setup compared to last year. The main lens around back is once again a crazy 108 megapixel f1.9 aperture lens. The secondary ultra-wide camera is a slightly wider 8 megapixel 120 degree shooter, and there's also a 12 megapixel macro lens for super close-up pictures. The selfie camera is a similar 16 megapixel shooter with a slightly better f2.4 aperture, and inside the camera app, Poco once again delivers easily one of the most feature-rich shooting environments for a device in this price range. The essentials and extras are all here. Ultra-wide to up to 10 times digital zoom, a dedicated document scanner, portrait mode, night mode, pro controls, the 108 megapixel photo mode, panorama, time-lapse, slow-mo, and 4K video recording at up to 30 frames per second. There's nothing here, in my opinion, that's missing from the camera app or the camera hardware really, and just snapping some quick sample pictures with the selfie lens and rear main lens, I definitely like the results. The images to me are super balanced, they're not overly saturated and not overly processed. There's a great amount of detail across the board as well. And while the camera hardware didn't seem much of a change, I do think the upgraded, more powerful components inside this phone are certainly going to be able to process these images a lot better and a lot more accurately. And this is one more area where I think Poco definitely delivers a ton of value. All in all, the new Poco X5 Pro is a marginal upgrade over last year's X4 Pro. While a lot stayed the same, I do think the internal spec upgrades at least are certainly a welcome change. And while I would never really recommend getting a new phone every single year nowadays, if you're a Poco phone fan and it's been a little while since your last new device, the new X5 Pro I think is a really great value for that $500 price point. The display is solid, the camera is great, and the internal specs now, I think, give this phone the performance it deserves. But what do you guys think about the new Poco X5 Pro? Is it something you're considering right now? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.